Tonight, the Senate delivers good news for America. There will be no government shutdown right before Christmas. This is a good bill. It'll keep the government open and funds and helps Americans affected by hurricanes and natural disasters, helps our farmers, and avoid harmful cuts. We have order, please.
The Senate will be in order.
After a chaotic few days in the House, it's good news that the bipartisan approach in the end prevailed. It's a good lesson for next year. Both sides have to work together. But by dealing with people who've had trouble with disasters, by helping our farmers avoiding harmful cuts, this is a good bill, and I'm glad we're passing it. I thank my Republican colleagues for working with us to move this bill quickly through the Senate. It's a good outcome for America and the American people. I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to the consideration of H.R. 10545, which the clerk will report.
H.R. 10545, an act making further continuing appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2025, and for other purposes.
There will now be up to 30 minutes for debate, equally divided.
Madam President.
The senior senator from Washington.
Madam President, I will not use 15 minutes, but I do want to just let our colleagues know that I am very pleased that we're on the verge of passing long overdue relief, desperately needed by communities who are recovering from disaster, as well as avoiding a damaging shutdown. The only reason it took so long and this much chaos to get here is that House Republicans chose chaos and chose to follow the whims of the richest man in the world. Needless to say, that is not how this should work, but I am glad that at the end of the day, we will avoid a shutdown and get disaster relief out to families and communities who are struggling after being hit by hurricanes and fires and floods and so much more. I worked hard with members on both sides of the aisle to finally get this aid across the line and to make sure we did so in a comprehensive way that meets the wide range of critical needs in the country. Because it is painfully clear there are so many communities who are still reeling from hurricanes and wildfires, tornadoes, flooding, and more, who really do need this support. So despite all the unnecessary chaos and delay, I am glad that we are finally here getting this done. This relief will make a critical difference for folks who've lost it all and are simply working to get their feet back underneath them. I urge all of my colleagues to join me in passing this package so we can get this over the line and avoid a needless shutdown as we head into the holidays. And finally, Madam President, one last important thing. I want to recognize my colleagues who helped pull this relief package together, especially my Vice Chair on Appropriations, Senator Collins, who's been a critical partner, our House counterparts, Congresswoman DeLauro, Congressman Cole, who have pushed so hard to get this disaster relief done. And of course, I want to thank all of our staff, especially Evan Schatz, our staff director, who worked so hard around the clock to pull together not just the disaster relief in this package, but so many other critical funding packages and proposals over the last 2 years I've been chair of the Appropriations Committee. The work is never easy, and I'm incredibly grateful to our entire team and to all of our colleagues who've been working so hard. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senior senator from Maine.
Madam President, I rise to urge passage of the American Relief Act. This bill will avert a costly government shutdown. Although it is after midnight, we are going to avert it. It will deliver much-needed assistance to individuals, small businesses, and communities working to rebuild and repair in the wake of natural disasters. It provides much-needed aid to our farmers across the country who have been hit by a tidal wave of harmful economic conditions. I want to thank the many senators who contributed to this legislation. And in particular, I want to recognize Chair Murray for her leadership of the Appropriations Committee during this Congress. I hope that in the next Congress we can bring appropriations bills to the Senate floor in a timely fashion to avoid this kind of end-of-the-year pileup. I do urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I too want to recognize and thank my outstanding staff for their hard work. Finally, Madam President, I do want to say that it is a great accomplishment that tonight the Senate passed the Social Security Fairness Act, which will be sent to the President for his signature. This is long overdue, and I want to share with my colleagues one really important fact, and that is that 83% of those who are affected by the government pension offset, which we repealed tonight, are lower-income women. So this is a great accomplishment to eliminate these two inequitable, unfair provisions of the Social Security Act. It's going to make a big difference. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Democratic Leader.
This is the last vote not only of this evening, but of the 118th Congress, and we yield back all time.
All time is yielded back. The clerk will read the title of the bill for the third time.
H.R. 10545, an act making further continuing appropriations and so forth and for other purposes.
The question is on passage of the bill. Is there a sufficient second? There is. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Aye.
Mr. Barrasso. Yeah. Thank you. Gotcha. Mr. Bennett. You too. I was going to say, what are you doing? Yeah. Pardon.
Make sure this bill's in order. Governor. I'm trying not to make eye contact with any of you.
Capito. Yes. You too. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
You too. Thank you. Nope. Thank you. Mr. Sanders. Okay, I'll get you. Thank you. Right.
Absolutely. 55 minutes I was off. 55 minutes. That's pretty good.
Mr. Bozeman. Thank you.
As the #2 guy in the Foreign Relations Committee, I think you should get
I got you.
Have a good holiday.
White House eye.
Thank you.
And Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to do better next year. I promise.
Merry Christmas.
It's my New Year's resolution. It's my New Year's resolution.
Thank you.
Really? You think I can ruin things like that? I'm New Year's resolution. Thank you, sir. You too.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Good holiday.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.
I will. I'm doing well.
Okay, you bet. Merry Christmas. Thank you. Thank you. Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
I do. I got you. Thanks, Smith. For sure.
Thank you.
And for happy hour.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
I do. Thank you. Mr. Braun, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Brown. Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell. Oh, thank you. Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins. She's there. She's not. She's okay. Thank you. Gotcha. I gotcha. Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz. Merry Christmas. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher. I did. Thank you. Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirona, Mr. Hoban, Mrs. Height-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Lankford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan. Thank you, Mayor. Yep. Happy Hanukkah. Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Merkley, Mr. Moran, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Mr. Romney, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Ms. Sinema, Ms. Smith, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Vance, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young.
Okay.
85 to 11. My handwriting did a little low.
Okay. On this vote, the yeas are 85, the nays are 11. The 60-vote threshold having been achieved, the bill is passed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume executive session to consider the following nominations in block, calendar numbers 851, 853, 854, and 857. The question occurs on the nominations in block. All in favor say aye. Any opposed, nay? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The nominations are confirmed on block. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's actions.
Mr. President.
From Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a moment, I will ask for unanimous consent to pass H.R. 3433, the Bipartisan Give Kids a Chance Act. I'd like to highlight